when 28-year-old diesel mechanic Jordan Hayes handed over $800 cash for what locals called the ugliest heap of metal in 3 counties. The auction crowd's laughter echoed across the salvage yard. But hidden beneath decades of rust and neglect, that forgotten 1967 Airstream trailer contained something no one could have predicted, a discovery that would not only vindicate Jordan's vision, but expose a 50-year cover-up involving one of America's most celebrated architects, and transform her from struggling tradesperson into an unlikely guardian of design history. Before we dive into this incredible journey, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. And if stories of underdogs proving everyone wrong inspire you, hit that subscribe button. Tomorrow's story is even more unbelievable. The spring morning in Dalton, Montana carried the sharp scent of motor oil and disappointment. Jordan Hayes stood in the employee parking lot of Rocky Mountain Diesel and Repair, staring at the pink slip in her hands. After 6 years of proving herself in a male-dominated field, of arriving early and staying late, of taking every certification course she could afford, she was being let go. "It's not personal, Jordan," her boss Carl Brennan had said, avoiding eye contact. "The new ownership wants to restructure. They're bringing in their own people." Translation: the corporate buyers who'd purchased the family-owned shop had no interest in keeping a woman on the crew, regardless of her skills. Jordan had seen it coming the moment the sale was announced 3 months ago. The writing had been on the wall in 1,000 small ways: the new manager's dismissive tone during meetings, the way her opinions were suddenly questioned more than before, the plum assignments going to less experienced male mechanics. At 28, Jordan was facing a reality she'd fought against her entire career. She had student loans from her technical certification program at Montana Tech, $34,000 still outstanding. Rent on her small apartment above the hardware store on Main Street was due in 2 weeks, and Mrs. Chen, her landlord, had been understanding about late payments before, but there were limits to everyone's patience. Her 15-year-old Dodge pickup truck needed a new transmission, which she'd been putting off for months, nursing it along with fluid changes and prayers. And now, no income. The severance check in her other hand was insultingly small, $2,400, representing 2 weeks' pay and accumulated vacation time. After taxes, it would barely cover 1 month's rent and basic expenses. Her savings account held another $2,800, money she'd been carefully accumulating toward eventually opening her own shop. That dream now felt impossibly distant. Jordan sat in her truck for a long moment, watching her former co-workers through the shop's large windows. Danny Morrison was already working on the Peterbilt. She'd been scheduled to service that morning. Life moved on quickly when you became expendable. She'd grown up in Dalton, a town of 8,000 people nestled in the Montana Rockies, where her father had run Hayes Auto Body, until a heart attack took him when Jordan was 19. She could still remember that day, with perfect clarity. She'd been in her 2nd semester at Montana Tech, studying for a welding certification exam, when her mother's call came. By the time Jordan made the 3-hour drive home, her father was gone. Robert Hayes had been more than a father to Jordan. He'd been her mentor, her cheerleader, her partner in grease-stained adventures since she was tall enough to hand him a wrench. While other daughters were having tea parties, 5-year-old Jordan was learning the difference between metric and standard sockets. By age 12, she could diagnose most engine problems by sound alone. Her father used to joke that she had motor oil in her veins instead of blood. Her mother, Linda Hayes, had never shared that passion. She'd tolerated the auto body shop as a necessary income source, but had no interest in running it after Robert's death. Within 3 months, she'd sold Hayes Auto Body to a regional chain, packed up the house, and moved to Phoenix to live with Jordan's older sister, Rebecca, who worked in pharmaceutical sales and had always been the successful daughter in their mother's eyes. "You should come to Arizona with us," her mother had urged during those difficult weeks after the funeral. "There's nothing for you here, Jordan. Your father's dream died with him. You need to think about your future." But Jordan couldn't leave. Dalton was where her father's legacy lived. Every street corner held a memory of him, teaching her to drive stick shift in the high school parking lot, taking her to Murphy's Diner for chocolate shakes after particularly tough repair jobs, standing in the audience at her technical school graduation with tears of pride in his eyes. She'd stayed in Dalton, determined to honor her father's legacy by mastering the trade he'd taught her since childhood. While other girls in high school were at prom, Jordan was rebuilding carburetors in her dad's shop. While her college friends were studying liberal arts at the university, she was getting certified in heavy equipment repair, diesel mechanics, and welding at the technical college. Her high school guidance counselor, Mrs. Patricia Donovan, had been blunt during their senior year meeting. "You'll never make it as a female mechanic," she'd said, pursing her lips. "It's a man's world, honey. The physical demands, the culture, the discrimination. You'll burn out within 5 years. Maybe consider nursing or dental hygiene. Those are good careers for women who like working with their hands." Jordan had smiled politely and ignored her completely. But Mrs. Donovan's words had proven prophetic in some ways. The discrimination was real and constant. During her apprenticeship, she'd endured propositions from customers who couldn't believe a woman could fix their vehicles. She'd faced skepticism from parts suppliers who directed their technical questions to male co-workers, even when Jordan was the lead mechanic on a job. She'd cleaned up after co-workers who left crude jokes and pornographic images in her toolbox as pranks. She'd persevered through all of it, driven by her father's memory and her own stubborn refusal to quit. She became AC certified in 8 different areas. She could rebuild a diesel engine faster and more precisely than any mechanic in the county. She'd once diagnosed an electrical problem that had stumped 3 other shops, saving the customer thousands of dollars. None of it had mattered to the new corporate ownership. Now standing in that parking lot with a severance check that wouldn't cover 2 months' expenses, Jordan felt that familiar fire reignite. She'd been knocked down before. She'd get back up. She drove aimlessly through Dalton for an hour, processing her emotions and trying to formulate a plan. The town looked particularly gray under the overcast sky. Main Street storefronts were a mix of surviving local businesses and empty retail spaces. The old movie theater had been converted into a church. The bookstore where she'd bought automotive manuals as a teenager was now a vape shop. Dalton was dying slowly, bleeding young people to bigger cities with better opportunities. Jordan had always resisted that migration, clinging to her hometown out of loyalty to her father's memory. But maybe it was time to admit defeat and join her generation's exodus to Denver or Seattle, or anywhere that offered better prospects for skilled tradespeople. The solution came from an unexpected source. A flyer stapled to a telephone pole near Murphy's Diner, where she stopped for coffee and comfort food. Estate liquidation auction Saturday, April 12, 10 a.m. Riverside salvage yard vehicles, trailers, tools, equipment,
Everything must go. Estate of Walter Cunningham Jordan had driven past Riverside Salvage 1,000 times, the sprawling 5-acre property on the eastern edge of town that everyone knew belonged to the reclusive Walter Cunningham. The old man had been a fixture in Dalton for as long as anyone could remember, a former aerospace engineer who'd retired to Montana in the 1970s and spent the next 50 years collecting anything with wheels or an engine. Walter had passed away 6 months ago at age 87, and the gossip at Murphy's Diner had been endless. He had no wife, no children, no living relatives anyone knew about. His estate was going to the state of Montana, and everything he'd accumulated over 5 decades was being liquidated to satisfy tax debts and legal fees. Jordan wasn't looking for a project. She was looking for survival. Maybe she could buy some tools cheap, flip some parts on eBay or Craigslist, generate enough cash to stay afloat while she found another job. Or maybe she'd find something worth restoring, a classic car or motorcycle she could fix up and sell for a profit. It was a long shot, but it was something. Saturday morning arrived, grey and drizzly, typical Montana spring weather that couldn't decide between winter and summer. Jordan pulled into Riverside Salvage at 9:30 a.m. to scout the inventory before the auction started. About 40 people were already there, mostly locals hoping for bargains, weekend hobbyists examining vintage motorcycles, scrap dealers calculating weights and metal values, and a few serious collectors with notebooks and cameras documenting the more interesting finds. Jordan recognized here that
Danny Ortega from the local scrapyard was making notes on several vehicles that were clearly destined for the crusher. She registered her bidder number 23 and began walking the rows of vehicles. Most were exactly what you'd expect from a hoarder's collection, picked clean, rusted beyond restoration, or so common that they held no particular value. A dozen pickup trucks from the 1980s and 90s in various states of decay. Several sedans that had surrendered to gravity and time. A school bus that someone had apparently tried to convert into an RV before abandoning the project halfway through. But then she saw it, tucked in the far corner of the property, almost hidden behind a collapsed carport structure that had deposited decades of leaves and debris around its base. A 1967 Airstream Globetrotter travel trailer, or what was left of one. Jordan felt her pulse quicken. She'd always loved Airstreams, those iconic aluminum capsules that represented a particular vision of American freedom and adventure. Her father had dreamed of buying one someday, restoring it, and taking a cross-country trip with his daughter. They'd looked at listings together online during his final years, planning routes and discussing restoration techniques, but the money had never been there for such an extravagance. This particular Airstream had clearly been sitting in this exact spot for decades. The iconic aluminum shell was oxidized to a dull, mottled gray-brown, the silver finish long since surrendered to Montana weather. Rivets were missing along several seams, creating gaps where water had undoubtedly penetrated. The curved door hung at a slight angle, one hinge corroded beyond function. The windows were either cracked or missing entirely, with cardboard and plastic sheeting visible from the outside, where someone had apparently made half-hearted attempts at weather protection. Weeds had grown up around the wheel wells, some reaching heights of 3 or 4 feet. One tire was completely flat, the rubber cracked and separated from the rim. The other 3 tires were dry-rotted, with visible cracks and missing chunks of tread. The trailer's distinctive curved shape was still intact, but the overall impression was of something abandoned and forgotten, left to the slow mercy of time and elements. Jordan circled the trailer slowly, her trained eye assessing the damage. The frame appeared solid. Airstream frames were built to last, and even decades of neglect couldn't destroy quality steel construction. The axle looked salvageable. The aluminum shell, despite its appearance, was likely structurally sound beneath the oxidation. Airstream used aircraft-grade aluminum, and while it could corrode, it rarely developed the catastrophic rust-through problems that plagued traditional RVs. She tried the door. It was locked, but the lock was so corroded that a firm pull popped it open with a protesting squeal of metal on metal. The interior was worse than the exterior. Water damage was extensive. The ceiling fabric had long since rotted away, revealing the curved aluminum ribs of the shell structure. The floor felt spongy in places where water had compromised the subfloor. The original dinette and sleeping area were barely recognizable under layers of mildew, rodent damage, and general decay. The small kitchen area's cabinets had warped and split. The bathroom was a disaster of corroded fixtures and black mold. It was, objectively, a catastrophe. But Jordan saw something else. She saw the bones of exceptional craftsmanship. She saw the distinctive Airstream construction that had made these trailers legendary. The aircraft-style riveted aluminum, the curved shell design that was both beautiful and aerodynamic, the quality hardware and fixtures that even decades of neglect couldn't completely destroy. And most importantly, she saw opportunity. Jordan pulled out her phone and started researching. Restored vintage Airstreams were commanding premium prices. She found a 1968 model similar to this one that had sold for $68,000 after a complete restoration. Another 1965 model, professionally restored, had sold for $52,000. Even amateur restorations with some rough edges were fetching $25,000 to $35,000 from buyers who wanted the vintage aesthetic with modern functionality. Her mind began calculating materials for a full restoration: aluminum sheets, rivets, insulation, new flooring, fixtures, appliances, upholstery would run approximately $8,000 to $12,000 if she was frugal and did all the labor herself. She had the skills. She had the tools, mostly. She had the time, now that she was unemployed. If she could buy this trailer cheap enough, she could restore it over 3 to 4 months, sell it for $30,000 to $40,000, and have enough capital to either start her own mobile repair business or relocate to a city with better opportunities. It would be her father's dream realized in a different form, not a cross-country adventure, but a restoration project that combined their shared love of craftsmanship and problem-solving. It was risky, it was ambitious, it would consume every dollar she had, but it was a plan, and a plan was better than the slow spiral of unemployment and debt. Jordan spent another 20 minutes examining every inch of the trailer, documenting the damage with photos, making notes about what materials she'd need. The more she looked, the more confident she became. The major structural elements were sound. The damage was extensive, but cosmetic and mechanical, exactly the kind of problems her skill set was designed to solve. At 10 a.m. sharp, the auctioneer called everyone to gather. Hank Peterson was a fixture at estate sales and auctions throughout Montana, a weathered man in his 60s with a voice that could carry across a football field and a no-nonsense approach to separating people from their money. "All right, folks, welcome to the Cunningham Estate auction," he announced through a portable sound system. We've got about 200 lots to get through today, so let's keep things moving. Everything is sold as is, where is. No warranties, no returns, no crying to me if you bought something that doesn't work. Cash, check, or credit card accepted. 10% buyer's premium on all lots. Any questions? No one had questions. This crowd knew the drill. The auction moved efficiently through the first lots. Hand tools, power tools, workbenches, air compressors. Jordan bid on a few items, but was quickly outbid by dealers with deeper pockets. The serious collectors emerged when the motorcycles came up, driving prices higher than she could justify. She waited, conserving her limited resources for the one item she really wanted. Finally, after nearly 3 hours, they reached the vehicles in the back corner. The Airstream was lot 47. Jordan positioned herself near the front of the crowd, her bidder paddle in hand, trying to appear casual while her heart hammered against her ribs. Hank walked over to the Airstream, surveying it with barely concealed disgust. "All right, folks, we've got lot 47, 1967 Airstream Globetrotter travel trailer. As you can plainly see, this one has seen better days, decades, maybe centuries." A few people chuckled. "We're starting the bidding at $500. Do I hear $500 for this vintage classic?" Silence greeted his question. Jordan kept her paddle down, waiting. "Never bid first if you could help it." "Come on, folks," Hank continued, his tone shifting to cajoling. "It's a genuine Airstream. These things are iconic. Aluminum alone has scrap value. How about $300 to get us started?" Jordan raised her paddle. "300. A few people turned to look at her. Hank nodded with visible relief. "Thank you, bidder. 23. We've got $300. Do I hear $350? Another long silence. The crowd seemed to be collectively deciding this trailer wasn't worth anyone's time or money. Then a voice from the back. Tom Granger, the RV dealer. "Jordan, honey, don't waste your money on that thing. I've been in this business 23 years. That trailer's beyond saving. The frame might be okay, but everything else is shot. You'd spend $15,000 to $20,000 on materials and end up with something worth maybe $12,000 if you're lucky. Trust me on this." A few people murmured agreement. Several heads nodded. Jordan kept her paddle up, her jaw set, refusing to look at Granger. Hank seemed uncertain how to proceed. "Well, we've got $300 from bidder 23. Anyone else interested?" 500 called out a new voice. Derek Morrison, the property flipper, was smirking as he raised his paddle. Jordan knew Derek from high school. He'd been a jock, she'd been a grease monkey, and he'd never missed an opportunity to remind her that girls didn't belong in shop class. Derek wasn't bidding because he wanted the trailer. He was bidding to teach the little lady mechanic a lesson about knowing her place, just like he'd tried to do in high school when he'd destroyed her shop class project and claimed it was an accident. Jordan felt her blood pressure rising. She had $5,200 total available, the severance check, her savings, and what was left in her checking account. That was supposed to last until she found work, cover rent, food. She couldn't afford to get into a bidding war, but she also couldn't afford to back down. Not to Derek Morrison, not again. 800, she said clearly, her voice carrying across the crowd. The auction yard went quiet. Several people exchanged glances. Derek's smirk faded slightly as he reassessed the situation. "Are you serious?" he called out. "Jordan, come on, that's a complete money pit. That's rent money you're throwing away. Be smart about this." She ignored him, keeping her eyes on Hank. The auctioneer looked between them.
We're at $800 from bidder 23. Do I hear $850? Derek shook his head slowly, still smiling but with an edge to it now. All yours, sweetheart. Enjoy your new home when you can't make rent next month. A few people laughed. Jordan felt her face flush but kept her expression neutral. Going once at $800, Hank announced. Going twice at $800. He paused dramatically. Sold for $800 to bidder 23. Jordan Hayes, congratulations on your new project. The way he said project made it clear he thought she'd lost her mind. As Jordan walked toward the cashier's table to settle her payment, she heard the whispers and comments following her. Did she actually just buy that piece of junk? What's she gonna do with it? She doesn't have a shop anymore. Girl's got more guts than sense, I'll tell you that. Probably thinks she can flip it. Good luck with that disaster. Tom Granger fell into step beside her as she waited in line to pay. Jordan, seriously, I've been doing this for 2 decades. That trailer's structural integrity is compromised. You're looking at water damage to the subfloor, probably frame rot, definitely corrosions in all the critical areas. The electrical system will need complete replacement. Plumbing too. You'd be better off buying a shell and starting from scratch. She turned to face him, forcing herself to stay calm. Thanks for the concern, Tom. I appreciate it, but I know what I'm doing. He sighed heavily. Your funeral, kid. When you realize you're in over your head and need to unload it, don't come crying to me. I'm not buying that disaster for any price. Noted, Jordan replied coolly. She paid her $800 plus the $80 buyer's premium with her debit card, watching her savings account balance drop from $2,800 to $1,920 in a single transaction. She received the title paperwork, a single key on the rusted keychain, and a receipt. The reality of what she'd just done began to settle in. She'd spent almost half her liquid assets on a deteriorating trailer that everyone, including an experienced RV dealer, believed was worthless.
She had no shop to work in, limited tools, and no clear timeline for completion. If this restoration failed, she'd have no safety net, no backup plan, no path forward. But she'd also just acquired a project that could potentially transform her life if she could execute it properly. Jordan arranged for Tucker's Towing to haul the Airstream to a storage unit she was renting on the outskirts of town, a 20x30 covered space she'd been using to store some of her father's old tools and equipment. It would be tight, but the trailer would fit with just enough room to work around it. As the trailer was loaded onto the flatbed tow truck, Jordan heard more laughter and commentary from the lingering auction crowd. How much you want to bet she tries to return it within a week? That thing should go straight to the scrapyard. Whoever Cunningham was, he should have thrown that away 30 years ago. Hey Jordan, Derek Morrison called out. When you're done wasting your time on that, come work for me. I could use someone to hand me tools while the real contractors do the real work. More laughter. Even Carlos, the tow truck driver, seemed skeptical as he secured the chains. You sure you want to keep this, miss? I'm heading right past Danny's scrapyard. Be easy enough to drop it there instead. He'd probably give you $50 for the aluminum. Jordan climbed into her pickup truck and started the engine, refusing to respond to any of them. She followed the tow truck through Dalton's quiet streets, acutely aware of the curious stares from people on sidewalks and in other vehicles. Everyone thought she was crazy. Everyone thought she'd made a catastrophic mistake. Everyone was laughing at the unemployed female mechanic who'd just blown her savings on a rust bucket. But Jordan Hayes had spent her entire life being underestimated. She'd grown up in a world that told her girls couldn't be mechanics. She'd persevered through technical school, while instructors questioned whether she'd be able to handle the physical demands. She'd endured 6 years of condescension and discrimination in the workplace, proving herself with every repair, every diagnosis, every satisfied customer, and she'd spent her entire life proving people wrong. What none of them knew, what even Jordan didn't know yet, was that beneath the rust and decay, the 1967 Airstream was hiding something extraordinary, something that had been carefully concealed for more than 50 years, something that would turn the laughter into stunned silence and transform a dismissed female mechanic into the center of a story that would captivate the design world, expose a legendary architect's darkest secret, and ultimately vindicate not just Jordan's vision, but her father's faith in her abilities. The journey was just beginning, and Jordan Hayes was about to discover that sometimes the most valuable things in life are the ones everyone else has given up on. The storage unit on Maple Ridge Road had been Jordan's sanctuary for the past 3 years. It was where she kept her father's old tools, the ones her mother hadn't sold with the shop. A vintage snap-on toolbox that Robert Hayes had bought in 1985. A collection of specialty wrenches and sockets accumulated over decades. An old welding rig that still worked perfectly. A workbench he'd built himself from reclaimed lumber. Now the 1967 Airstream Globetrotter dominated the space, leaving barely enough room to walk around its perimeter. Jordan stood in the doorway that first evening, staring at what she'd purchased. In the harsh fluorescent lighting of the storage unit, the trailer looked even worse than it had at the auction. Every flaw was magnified. Every corroded rivet, every missing window, every patch of oxidized aluminum screamed that Tom Granger had been right. This was a money pit, and she was a fool. She pulled out her phone and opened her banking app. Balance $1,920. Rent due in 12 days, $850. Phone bill, $75. Truck insurance, $120. That left $875 for food, gas, and the beginning of a restoration that would require thousands in materials. The math didn't work. It had never worked, but she was committed now. Jordan spent that first night just cleaning. Not restoration work, just basic cleaning, to assess what she was actually dealing with. She swept out decades of leaves, dirt and rodent droppings. She pulled out the rotted cushions and mattress, dragging them to the dumpster behind the storage facility. She scraped away layers of mildew and grime from the aluminum walls, revealing the metal beneath. By midnight, exhausted and filthy, she'd made enough progress to see the trailer's bones more clearly. The aluminum shell was in better condition than she'd feared. The frame, once she crawled underneath with a flashlight, showed surface rust but no structural compromise. The axle was solid. Even some of the original cabinetry could potentially be salvaged with enough work. Maybe this wasn't completely insane. She returned the next morning with her father's old toolbox, a notebook, and a plan. She would document everything methodically, photograph every detail, create a complete inventory of what needed replacement versus what could be restored, develop a realistic budget and timeline. The morning sunlight streaming through the open storage unit door illuminated details she'd missed in the auction yard's chaos. The Airstream's curved aluminum panels, once polished to a mirror shine, showed the distinctive riveting pattern that was an Airstream trademark. The window frames, though corroded, were still the original aircraft-grade aluminum. Even the door, hanging crooked on its damaged hinges, retained the elegant curves of 1960s design. Jordan started at the front of the trailer and worked backward, photographing and documenting everything. The main sleeping area at the front, where the roof showed the most water damage, the kitchen area with its vintage propane stove and oxidized sink, The small bathroom with its corroded shower pan and rusted toilet flange. She was measuring the floor damage in the bathroom when her screwdriver punched through a particularly soft section of subfloor. The plywood beneath had completely rotted away, creating a cavity about 18 inches square. Jordan knelt down and shone her flashlight into the hole, expecting to see the steel frame members below. Instead, she saw something else. A metal box. It was wedged between the subfloor and the steel frame, deliberately hidden in a space that wouldn't normally be accessible without removing flooring. The box itself was aluminum, about the size of a shoebox, with a patina that matched the trailer's age. Jordan's heart began racing. Her mind immediately went to the kinds of things people hid in secret compartments. Money, drugs, stolen goods, or maybe just someone's personal effects, forgotten when the trailer was abandoned. She carefully widened the hole in the subfloor, pulling away rotted plywood until she could reach the box. It was heavier than she expected, and when she lifted it out, something inside shifted with a solid thunk. The box had no lock, just a simple latch that had corroded shut. Jordan carried it to her workbench and used a flathead screwdriver to carefully pry the latch open. Inside, wrapped in what had once been oilcloth, but was now brittle with age, were papers, lots of papers. And beneath them, something else. A leather portfolio embossed with gold lettering, so faded Jordan could barely make it out. She carefully unwrapped the oilcloth, revealing what appeared to be architectural drawings, blueprint-style documents on translucent vellum, the kind architects used before computer-aided design became standard. The drawings were detailed and professional, showing floor plans, elevations and technical specifications for various structures. But it was the signature in the corner that made Jordan's breath catch. Vincent Castellano, AIA 1967. Jordan knew that name. Everyone who'd taken even a basic art history or architecture class knew that name. Vincent Castellano had been one of the most celebrated American architects of the mid-20th century, a contemporary of Frank Lloyd Wright and Ludwig Mies van der Rohe. His modernist designs had defined an era: the Castellano Tower in Chicago, the Desert House in Palm Springs, the Riverside Cultural Center in New York. He died in 1969, at the height of his fame, in a plane crash that had also killed two of his associates. He'd been only 52 years old. The architectural world had mourned him as a genius cut down in his prime. But what were original Castellano drawings doing hidden in a decrepit Airstream trailer in Montana? Jordan carefully examined the drawings. There were perhaps 20 sheets total, all dated 1967, all signed by Castellano. They showed designs for what appeared to be private residences, modern homes with the distinctive Castellano aesthetic of clean lines, dramatic cantilevers, and integration with natural landscapes. But these weren't the famous Castellano works Jordan had seen in architecture books. These were different, smaller projects, private commissions perhaps, houses that had either never been built or had been built and never publicized. The leather portfolio contained something even more intriguing: a journal, handwritten pages in neat script, dated from January 1967 through August 1967. Jordan opened it carefully, the leather crackling with age. The first entry was straightforward. January 8, 1967. Acquired the Airstream today. Betty thinks I'm mad, spending money on a camping trailers when we have a perfectly good house, but she doesn't understand. This isn't about camping. This is about freedom. The freedom to disappear when I need to think. The freedom to escape the suffocating expectations of clients who want me to design their status symbols. The freedom to remember why I became an architect in the first place, not to make rich people richer, but to create beauty that serves humanity. Jordan sat down on an overturned crate, reading with growing fascination. The journal chronicled Vincent Castellano's relationship with this very trailer.
He'd apparently bought it new in 1967, had it customized to his specifications, and used it as a mobile studio and retreat. He would drive it to remote locations, Montana, Wyoming, Nevada, and spend weeks at a time sketching, designing, and apparently escaping from the pressures of his high-profile career. March 15, 1967, spent 3 weeks in Montana, parked near a creek outside a town called Dalton. The solitude is intoxicating. No clients demanding modifications, no architecture critics analyzing my every choice. Just me, the landscape, and pure design. I've been working on a series of residential projects that will never see the light of day. Why? Because they're too honest, too pure. They're houses designed for actual living, not for impressing neighbors or appearing in magazines. They're what I would build if I was still the idealistic young architect who believed design could change the world, rather than the corporate sellout I've become. Jordan flipped through more pages, her mind racing. This was incredible. A previously unknown chapter in the life of one of America's most celebrated architects. A secret retreat, hidden designs, a crisis of conscience about the direction of his career. But it was the final entries, from August 1967, that made Jordan's hands shake. August 10, 1967, I've made a decision. The Riverside Cultural Center is finished, and it's everything the clients wanted: impressive, expensive, and ultimately soulless. It will win awards. It will appear on magazine covers, and I will hate it for the rest of my life, because I compromised every principle I once held dear to give wealthy patrons their monuments to themselves. I'm done. After the Chicago Tower is complete next year, I'm walking away. I'll tell everyone I'm taking a sabbatical, but the truth is, I'm going to disappear. Take the Airstream. Drive to Montana or Wyoming or anywhere that isn't polluted by money and ego. Start over. Design houses for ordinary people. Build things that matter. But first, I need to hide the evidence. The designs I've created in this trailer over the past 6 months. They represent everything I wish my career could have been. Houses that prioritize function over form, that respond to their environment rather than dominating it, that serve families rather than ego. 20. If my partners find these, they'll either try to talk me out of leaving, or worse, they'll try to commercialize these designs, turn them into something they were never meant to be. So I'm hiding them in the trailer, in Montana, in the trailer, in Montana. Somewhere they'll be safe until I'm ready to return to them. And if nice
Portrays. The trailer. The post had been shared hundreds of times. Architecture blogs were writing about it. A journalist from Architectural Digest had sent her a direct message asking for an interview. A materials supplier in California had offered to donate aluminum sheeting and rivets. 3 different documentary filmmakers wanted to talk about following her restoration process. Most surprisingly, she'd received a message from someone claiming to be Vincent Castellano's granddaughter, asking if they could speak urgently about what Jordan had found. Jordan sat in her truck in the storage facility parking lot, watching her phone light up with notification after notification, and realized her life had just changed completely. The $800 trailer that everyone had laughed at her for buying had just become the center of an architectural mystery that was capturing the imagination of designers, historians, and dreamers across the country. Tom Granger had told her she was throwing her money away on a worthless piece of junk. Derek Morrison had mocked her for being in over her head. The auction crowd had laughed at the desperate, unemployed mechanic making a foolish mistake. But Jordan Hayes had just proven something she'd known her entire life. The most valuable things are often the ones everyone else has given up on, including herself. The journey she'd started 5 days ago, standing in a parking lot with a pink slip and a severance check, had just taken a turn no one could have predicted. The rusty trailer was hiding architectural treasures, and Jordan, the female mechanic everyone had underestimated, was about to become the guardian of a legendary architect's secret legacy. But first, she needed to call Vincent Castellano's granddaughter and find out if the family knew their famous ancestor had hidden his true masterworks in a trailer that had been slowly rotting away in Montana for over 50 years. Jordan took a deep breath, opened her messages, and started typing. The real story was just beginning. The phone call with Vincent Castellano's granddaughter, Isabella Castellano Wright, lasted 3 hours and changed everything Jordan thought she understood about the discovery. Isabella was 52 years old, a professor of architectural history at Columbia University, and she'd spent the last 2 decades researching her grandfather's life and work. When Jordan's social media post appeared, Isabella had been in the middle of teaching a seminar on mid-century American modernism. A student had shown her the post during a break. "I literally ran out of the classroom," Isabella said over the phone, her voice trembling with emotion. "My grandfather disappeared for weeks at a time in the late 1960s. The family knew he had an Airstream, but after he died, it vanished. My grandmother searched for years. She believed he'd hidden something important in it, but she never found the trailer. Eventually, everyone assumed it had been sold or scrapped. And now you're telling me you found it at an estate auction in Montana." Jordan sat in her truck, outside the storage unit, the journal and drawings secured in a locked toolbox beside her. "I found more than the trailer. I found his journal from 1967, and architectural drawings, 23 residential designs that were never built." The silence on the other end lasted so long Jordan thought the call had dropped. 23 designs, Isabella finally whispered. "My God, do you understand what you found? These would be the only complete set of Castellano residential projects from his mature period. Everything else was either commercial work or has been lost. This is the holy grail of Castellano scholarship." Over the next hour, Isabella explained the context Jordan had been missing. Vincent Castellano's reputation had been built on dramatic commercial projects, towers, cultural centers, corporate headquarters. But he'd always claimed in interviews that his true passion was residential architecture, designing homes for ordinary people. Critics had dismissed this as false modesty from an architect who clearly preferred prestige projects. "But my grandmother always insisted it was true," Isabella said. "She told me that Vincent was deeply conflicted about his career. He felt trapped by success. The more famous he became, the less freedom he had to pursue the work he actually cared about. She said he talked about leaving it all behind, but she thought it was just talk. Artists and architects always romanticize the idea of walking away." "According to his journal, he was serious about it," Jordan replied. "He planned to finish the Chicago Tower and then disappear, start over, build houses for real people instead of monuments for rich clients. And then the plane crash killed him 2 years later," Isabella said quietly. "He never got the chance." They talked through the logistics. Isabella wanted to see the drawings and journal as soon as possible. She could fly to Montana within days, but she also understood Jordan's position, unemployed, struggling financially, sitting on a discovery that could be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. "I'm not going to lie to you, Jordan," Isabella said with careful honesty. "The Castellano Foundation would pay substantial money for these materials. So would major museums. You could solve all your financial problems by selling them, and no one would blame you. You bought that trailer legally. Whatever you found inside belongs to you." "But," Jordan prompted, sensing the hesitation, "but my grandfather hid those drawings for a reason. He wanted them kept separate from his commercial work. He was planning to use them when he walked away from the architectural establishment." "Legally? No. You bought the trailer and everything in it. but they can make your life difficult. Media pressure, legal challenges to the sale, they have resources and connections. Jordan felt the weight of what she'd gotten into. This wasn't just about restoring a trailer anymore. It was about competing visions of architectural legacy, about who had the right to interpret a dead artist's intentions, about class and access and cultural gatekeeping. "I'm not backing down," Jordan said firmly. "This is too important." "I know," Isabella replied. "Neither am I." They continued working on the restoration plan. The Montana Historical Preservation Society came through with a heritage designation that provided access to $15,000 in restoration grants. The materials manufacturer in Oregon shipped everything needed for the Airstream's exterior restoration. Montana State's Architecture Department assigned 6 students to work with Jordan as part of a practical learning project. The storage unit became a workshop. Jordan spent 12 to 14 hours a day, stripping the trailer down to its frame, cataloging every component, planning the restoration sequence. The architecture students helped with research, documentation, and the heavy lifting that Jordan couldn't manage alone. Marcus Chen, the documentary filmmaker, set up cameras to record the process. True to his word, he didn't interfere, just documented. Jordan found his presence surprisingly unobtrusive, but the foundation wasn't giving up. Catherine Thornburg began reaching out to Jordan's sponsors, suggesting they were supporting an unqualified amateur who was in over her head. Some sponsors wavered. One materials supplier withdrew their support entirely. The negative attention reached the local level too. Tom Granger started spreading rumors around Dalton that Jordan was exploiting the discovery for profit, that she'd probably stolen the drawings somehow, that the whole thing was a scam. Derek Morrison posted on Facebook, "Funny how some people stumble into luck and suddenly think they're experts. Jordan Hayes couldn't keep a job as a mechanic, but now she's supposedly going to restore a vintage trailer and build an architect's house. This is going to be a spectacular failure." The comments on his post were brutal. People Jordan had known her whole life questioned her abilities, her motives, her right to be doing any of this. Jordan tried to ignore it, focusing on the work, but the doubt crept in during the long nights alone in the storage unit. Who was she kidding? She was an unemployed mechanic with no construction experience, attempting something that professional builders would find challenging. The foundation was probably right. She was romanticizing a dead architect's crisis of conscience and pretending it was a mission. Isabella found her one evening sitting on the trailer's frame, staring at nothing. "Doubt is normal," Isabella said, sitting beside her. "My grandfather wrote about it constantly in his journals. Every creative person doubts themselves. The question is whether you let doubt stop you or use it to make you more careful and thoughtful." "Everyone thinks I'm going to fail," Jordan said quietly. "Everyone thought my grandfather was crazy for caring about residential architecture when he could be designing towers," Isabella replied. "Everyone thought you were crazy for buying this trailer. You've been proving people wrong your whole life. Why stop now?" Jordan looked at the stripped trailer frame, the careful documentation they'd created, the pile of materials waiting to transform rust into beauty. "Because the stakes are higher now. If I fail, I'm not just embarrassing myself. I'm disrespecting your grandfather's legacy." "You want to know what would really disrespect his legacy?" Isabella asked. "Letting fear and doubt win. Letting institutions and gatekeepers decide who gets to participate in architectural culture. Letting this trailer and these drawings become just another museum exhibit instead of inspiration for living, buildable design. That's what would disrespect him." Over the next month, Jordan poured everything into the restoration. The frame was cleaned, treated for rust, and repainted. New subfloor went in, carefully worked around the compartment where she'd found the drawings. The aluminum shell was polished panel by panel, each rivet inspected and replaced if necessary. New windows were custom-made to match the original specifications. The architecture students were invaluable, their young enthusiasm balancing Jordan's growing exhaustion. They researched period-appropriate materials, helped source vintage fixtures, and learned practical skills their classroom education couldn't provide. Marcus's cameras captured everything: the tedious work, the small victories, the occasional setbacks when something didn't fit right, or a panel buckled during installation. Jordan got used to his presence, sometimes forgetting he was filming until she noticed the red recording light. 3 months into the restoration, Jordan received an unexpected visitor. Walter Cunningham's lawyer, an elderly attorney named Gerald Hoffman, showed up at the storage unit unannounced. "Miss Hayes, I represent the estate of Walter Cunningham. I understand you purchased an Airstream trailer at his estate auction." Jordan's guard went up immediately. "Yes, legally and properly. I have all the documentation." "I'm not here to challenge the sale," Gerald said, raising his hands peacefully. "I'm here because I recently discovered something among Mr. Cunningham's papers that you should know about." He pulled out a letter, yellowed with age, dated August 1967. This was written by Vincent Castellano to Walter Cunningham. They were friends, apparently. They'd met through aerospace industry connections. Castellano consulted on some Boeing projects in the mid-60s. According to this letter, Castellano asked Cunningham to store the Airstream for him in Montana. He planned to come back for it after finishing some projects, but obviously that never happened. Jordan read the letter carefully. It confirmed what she'd suspected. The trailer had been deliberately left with Cunningham, not abandoned or forgotten. "Why are you showing me this now?" Jordan asked. Gerald smiled sadly. "Because Walter Cunningham knew what was in that trailer. This letter mentions the drawings and journals explicitly. Walter kept the trailer all these years, maintaining it as best he could, hoping Castellano's family would someday come looking for it. But they never did. When Walter's health declined, he couldn't maintain anything anymore, and the trailer deteriorated. He died believing he'd failed his friend by letting it fall apart." Jordan felt a lump in her throat. He didn't fail. He kept it safe. Without him, these drawings would have been lost decades ago. "I'd like you to have this letter," Gerald said. "It's part of the trailer's history, part of the story you're telling." After he left, Jordan sat alone with the letter, understanding the full chain of custody now. Castellano to Cunningham to estate auction to Jordan. Each person in that chain had played a role in preserving something important, even when they didn't fully understand what they were protecting. The restoration continued. Interior cabinetry was rebuilt, using period-appropriate techniques. The electrical system was completely rewired to modern standards, while maintaining the vintage aesthetic. Plumbing was replaced. The bathroom was reconstructed with careful attention to the original layout. 6 months after Jordan had bought the trailer for $800, the restoration was complete. The 1967 Airstream Globetrotter gleamed like new, its aluminum shell polished to a mirror finish, its interior a perfect blend of vintage charm and modern functionality. Every detail had been carefully researched and executed. Every component honored the original design, while meeting contemporary safety and efficiency standards. Jordan stood outside the storage unit on a cold November morning, looking at what she'd created, and allowed herself a moment of pride. She'd done this. An unemployed mechanic with no formal training in restoration had brought a derelict trailer back to life. But this was just the beginning. The real challenge, building one of Castellano's hidden house designs, still lay ahead. And the Castellano Foundation was about to make one final attempt to stop her. The confrontation came on a grey December morning, when Jordan arrived at the storage unit to find 2 black SUVs parked outside and 4 people waiting for her. Catherine Thornburg stood at the center, flanked by 2 lawyers and a man Jordan didn't recognize. They looked decidedly out of place in rural Montana. Expensive wool coats, designer bags, the unmistakable sheen of Manhattan wealth. "Miss Hayes," Catherine said, without preamble. "We need to talk." Jordan unlocked the storage unit door slowly,
buying time to think. The restored Airstream gleamed in the dim light, a testament to 6 months of relentless work. I don't recall scheduling a meeting. This is Dr. Marcus Bellamy. Catherine gestured to the fourth person, an older man with silver hair. He's the world's leading Castellano scholar. He's reviewed the photographs of the drawings you claim to have found, and he has concerns about their authenticity. Jordan's stomach dropped, but she kept her expression neutral. Claim to have found, I documented everything. Isabella Castellano authenticated them herself. Isabella is emotionally invested, Dr. Bellamy said, his tone condescending. She wants to believe her grandfather had this secret cache of idealistic residential designs. But my analysis of the drawing techniques, the paper aging, even the handwriting in the journal, there are inconsistencies that suggest these materials may have been created more recently and artificially aged. You're calling me a forger? Jordan's voice was dangerously quiet. We're suggesting the possibility of fraud, one of the lawyers interjected smoothly. Which is why we're offering you a way out. Sell the materials to the Foundation for independent verification. If they're authentic, you'll be compensated fairly. If they're not, you avoid potential criminal charges. Jordan pulled out her phone and called Isabella. You need to get here. Now while they waited, Jordan opened the storage unit fully, letting them see the restored trailer. Catherine walked around it slowly, her expression unreadable. This is impressive work, she admitted grudgingly. But it doesn't change the questions about the drawings.
Isabel arrived within 20 minutes, her face flushed with anger. Marcus, how dare you? I sent you those photographs in confidence for scholarly consultation, not so you could ambush Jordan with accusations of fraud. Dr. Bellamy had the grace to look uncomfortable. Isabella, I have legitimate concerns about the provenance. Provenance. Isabella cut him off. I'll tell you about provenance. My grandmother searched for that trailer for 30 years. She knew my grandfather had hidden something important in it. Jordan found it exactly where it should have been, in Montana, with Walter Cunningham, who my grandfather explicitly trusted with it. There's a letter from Vincent to Cunningham that confirms everything. She pulled out her phone and showed them photographs of the letter Gerald Hoffman had provided. Dr. Bellamy studied the images, his certainty visibly wavering. I wasn't aware of this correspondence, because you didn't bother to do thorough research before accusing someone of fraud, Isabella said coldly. You saw an opportunity to discredit a discovery that threatens the Foundation's carefully curated version of my grandfather's legacy, and you took it. Catherine's expression hardened. That's unfair. The Foundation has devoted decades to preserving Vincent Castellano's work, to preserving the parts of his work that fit your narrative, Isabella interrupted. The successful commercial architect, the modernist master, you've ignored or minimized anything that suggested he was conflicted about that success, that he wanted to do something different. These drawings prove he was serious about designing for ordinary people, not just wealthy clients. That's inconvenient for the Foundation's fundraising narrative. The argument continued for another hour, with lawyers threatening legal action and Isabella threatening to go public with the Foundation's attempt to suppress historically significant materials. Jordan stood quietly, letting Isabella handle the confrontation while she processed what was really happening. This wasn't about authenticity. The Foundation knew the drawings were real. That's why they were so desperate to control them. If Jordan built one of Castellano's designs and it succeeded, it would validate everything the architect had written in his journal about accessible, people-centered design being viable. It would expose the Foundation's decades of emphasizing his commercial work while ignoring his residential philosophy. Finally, Jordan spoke. I'm not selling the drawings, I'm not giving them to the Foundation, and I'm going to build one of Vincent Castellano's houses exactly as he designed it. Catherine turned to her sharply. You're a mechanic with no construction experience. You're unemployed with no capital. Building a house from scratch is vastly more complex than restoring a trailer. You'll fail, and when you do, you'll have wasted a historically significant discovery on your hubris. Maybe, Jordan acknowledged, but it's my right to try. I bought that trailer legally. Everything in it belongs to me, and I'm going to honor Vincent Castellano's actual vision, not the sanitized version the foundation has been selling. One of the lawyers stepped forward. We can tie you up in court for years, question the auction's legality, claim the drawings should have been part of Cunningham's estate and properly inventoried. By the time we're done, you'll have spent every penny you have on legal fees. Then that's what I'll spend, Jordan said steadily. Because this matters more than money. Your client spent his final years regretting that he'd let success corrupt his principles. He hid these drawings as a message to himself, to the future, to anyone who found them, that architecture should serve people, not egos. I'm not letting you bury that message again. The standoff broke when Marcus Chen emerged from behind the Airstream, camera in hand. I've been filming this entire conversation, he said calmly. Jordan, you might want to know that your live stream has about 40,000 people watching right now. Jordan blinked. My what? Marcus pointed to a small camera mounted on the storage unit wall. You gave me permission to document the restoration process. I set up streaming capability last month. Turns out people are really interested in this story. They've been watching you work for weeks, and they just watched the Castellano Foundation threaten to bankrupt you for trying to honor an architect's vision. Catherine's face went pale. One of the lawyers was already on his phone, clearly receiving urgent calls. The PR disaster was unfolding in real time. The foundation would like to propose a different arrangement, Catherine said quickly. Her tone completely changed. A partnership. We provide funding and expertise for building one of the houses. You maintain creative control. We document the process together. Everyone benefits. Jordan looked at Isabella, who shook her head slightly. They'll use their funding as leverage to control every decision. You'll end up building their version of my grandfather's design, not his actual vision. Then what's the alternative? Jordan asked. Over the next week, an alternative emerged from an unexpected source, the architectural community itself. Marcus's live stream footage went viral. Architects, designers, and students around the world rallied behind Jordan's story. A crowdfunding campaign launched by Montana State's Architecture Department raised $180,000 in 5 days. Materials manufacturers offered deep discounts or outright donations. Contractors volunteered labor. Most significantly, a wealthy tech entrepreneur named Sarah Kimura, who'd made her fortune in sustainable design, offered Jordan something extraordinary: 20 acres of Montana hillside perfect for Mountain House Hash, 7+ funding to build it, with one condition: that Jordan live in the house for at least 2 years to prove Castellano's design principles worked in practice. I'm tired of architecture being treated as an exclusive club for wealthy elites, Sarah explained over a video call. Vincent Castellano understood that good design should be accessible. Your story proves that people from non-traditional backgrounds can make meaningful contributions to design culture. I want to support that. The foundation, facing public backlash and donor pressure, eventually backed down. Catherine Thornburg issued a statement praising Jordan's dedication while carefully not apologizing for their attempted intimidation. Dr. Bellamy published a scholarly article authenticating the drawings and acknowledging his initial skepticism had been premature. Derek Morrison posted a grudging Facebook comment, "Okay, I was wrong about Jordan Hayes. Takes guts to do what she's doing. Respect." Tom Granger stopped by the storage unit one afternoon, looking uncomfortable. "I judged you too quickly at that auction. You saw something the rest of us missed. That takes skill and vision. If you need any help with the house project, let me know." Construction on Mountain House #7 began in April, 15 months after Jordan had bought the rusty trailer. The site Sarah Kimura had provided was perfect, a south-facing hillside with distant mountain views, exactly as Castellano's design specified. Jordan worked alongside professional contractors, architecture students and volunteers who came from across the country to be part of the project. She wasn't just a figurehead, she was on site every day, operating equipment, solving problems, learning construction techniques, while applying her mechanical knowledge to building systems. The house took shape slowly, exactly according to Castellano's 50-year-old drawings. Local stone for the foundation, timber framing using Montana lumber, large south-facing windows for passive solar heating, built-in furniture that maximized space efficiency. Every detail honored the architect's vision of beautiful, functional, affordable residential design. Marcus documented everything, creating a weekly video series that attracted millions of viewers. The story wasn't just about building a house, it was about challenging assumptions, honoring legacy, and proving that design excellence didn't require enormous budgets or famous architects. Isabella spent weeks on site, consulting on details, ensuring historical accuracy, and writing what would become a definitive book about her grandfather's hidden residential work. She and Jordan had become close friends, united by their shared mission and mutual respect. "My grandfather would have loved you," Isabella told Jordan one evening as they sat on the partially completed deck, watching the sunset. "You're exactly the kind of person he wanted to design for. Practical, skilled, unimpressed by pretension. Someone who values function and beauty in equal measure." "I'm just trying not to screw up his design," Jordan replied. "You're doing more than that. You're proving his philosophy was right, that residential architecture doesn't need to be expensive or exclusive to be excellent. That's revolutionary." The house was completed in November, 2 years after Jordan had bought the trailer. The final result was stunning. A 1,500 square foot home that felt spacious despite its modest size, that responded perfectly to its environment, that demonstrated how thoughtful design could create beauty and functionality without excess. The Castellano Foundation, now under new leadership, after Catherine Thornburg's quiet resignation, officially recognized the house as part of Vincent Castellano's architectural legacy. It was designated a historic site, though Jordan would live in it as planned. The restored Airstream sat beside the house, converted into a small museum displaying the original drawings, journal and documentation of both the restoration and construction process. Visitors came from around the world to see both structures, testament to one architect's hidden vision and one mechanic's determination to honor it. On a cold December morning, Jordan stood in her completed home, sunlight streaming through the large windows, warming the stone floors exactly as Castellano had designed. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, from unemployed mechanic to guardian of architectural history, from laughingstock at an auction to builder of a legendary architect's hidden masterpiece. Her phone buzzed. Job offers continued to pour in. Construction firms, restoration companies, even architecture schools, wanting her to teach practical building skills. She'd accepted a position developing a curriculum for Montana State that would train students in both design and hands-on construction, bridging the gap between theory and practice. The rusty trailer everyone had laughed at had yielded treasures beyond imagination. But the real treasure, Jordan realized, wasn't the drawings or the house or even the vindication of being proven right. The real treasure was discovering that the most valuable things in life, whether old trailers or forgotten dreams, are often the ones everyone else has given up on, including yourself. Vincent Castellano had hidden his true masterworks in a trailer,
because he'd given up on the architectural establishment, understanding his vision. Walter Cunningham had preserved that trailer for decades, hoping someone would someday recognize its importance. And Jordan Hayes, dismissed and underestimated her entire life, had been exactly the right person to find it all and bring it back to light. The laughter at the auction had long since faded. What remained was Mountain House #7, beautiful, functional, and lived in, proving that great design belongs to everyone, not just those who can afford famous architects. Jordan Hayes had built more than a house. She'd built a legacy that would inspire generations of designers, builders, and dreamers who dared to see value where others saw only rust.